Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of the book Modifying the Electronics of Modern Classic Cars. It's a book designed for people who own cars of the 1990s and 2000s. What I want to do today is I want to talk about a very special intercooler water spray. So if you've got a turbocharged car with an intercooler, you know that in hot weather performance really does go backwards. It goes backwards because higher intake air temperatures normally means that the ignition timing gets retarded, and in many cars boost gets automatically dropped as well. The hotter intake air also has less density, less oxygen in it, so there's less room to make power. So what can you do about that? A very effective way is to add a high quality intercooler water spray. Now, there are plenty of intercooler water sprays around. Typically they use something like a windscreen washer pump, a fairly crude nozzle, and it just basically sprays water all over the intercooler core as if you had a hose directed on it. But that's a very inefficient way of cooling your intercooler. What you want are the smallest possible water drops in a cloud ahead of the intercooler. Small drops evaporate more readily. They have what's called a greater surface area to volume ratio. And if they evaporate more readily, you get a change of state, a change from liquid to a gas, and that's what gives the great cooling effect. So you need the smallest possible droplets sprayed over the intercooler so they are evaporating and that cool air is passing through it. So how do you achieve that? Well, you need a high pressure pump. It's an absolute prerequisite if you're going to get small drops. And over the years I experimented with lots of different pumps. Pressure pumps used in potable water systems, in caravans, industrial 12-volt pumps, and none of them really did what I wanted. I wanted a fairly small volume of water, because you don't need a lot, a fairly small volume of water, but at very high pressure. And then I discovered the pumps that are used in cappuccino machines, coffee machines. What? Coffee machines? Well, inside a coffee machine, you have a little oscillating piston pump. They're designed to work on AC voltages, mains voltages, and as the frequency of the voltage changes, so the little oscillating pintle moves back and forward, so 50 times a second, or in the US 60 times a second. Now, because they're putting little spurts of water past the one-way valve, going back and forth, they can build very, very high pressure. How high? 200 psi, 300 psi, depends on how big a nozzle is that you use, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, these pumps are small, they're only about as big as my fist. They're relatively cheap, available online as coffee machine replacement parts, but they do have a downside. And that downside is they have to be run by a mains inverter. Now, in terms of cost, that's not very great at all. Mains inverters are very, very cheap. But what you do have to take into account is you will have mains voltages running in those cables in your car. So, in other words, you need to be very careful to properly insulate those wires, just as you would if you had an extension cord on the floor of your workshop. You need to make sure that nothing could cut those wires. And when you operate the spray, you switch on the inverter. When you turn off the spray, you switch off the inverter. Alright, so let's have a look at what we've been talking about. A cappuccino pump, a little oscillating piston pump, a little mains inverter, and it can be quite a low-powered one to run that pump. Now, what about the nozzle and what about the hose? Well, I suggest that you go for a really high quality nozzle. Spraying Systems, a US company, I've been using their products for a long, long time, 25 years. They make a lovely range of nozzles, and the one you're after is what's called an atomizing nozzle. It's designed to atomize the water, make it in very small droplets. They work very well at the sort of pressures that the coffee machine pump will provide. You can buy them with inbuilt filters that screw into the back of the nozzle, and I highly recommend that you do that. So select one of their nozzles, they're available in different flow rates, and then match it to one of these pumps. But what do you use between them? You can't use a hose with hose clamps because it will just blow it off. So you either need to get an industrial high pressure hose made, or you need to use one that I've done more recently, hoses designed for air suspension. And truck air suspension, for example. And these use nylon hose with push fit fittings. And as the name suggests, you simply get the fitting, push the hose in, and then it's rigidly locked in place and will cope with even those high pressures. Where do you get your water from? Well, if you're using a really high quality spray of the sort that I'm describing, the actual water consumption isn't anywhere near as great as those windscreen washers firing hoses at your intercooler. So I often just simply use the windscreen washer reservoir. I drill a hole in the base of it, screw in a fitting, tap in a fitting, and then I draw off the water as needed. And if you have a windscreen washer reservoir of decent volume, that'll be fine, that'll work very well. So what can you achieve with this spray? Well, I've tested cars, my own cars, where if you operate the spray and you're not at full load, the intake air temperature gets below ambient. Below ambient. How can that be possible? Well, the spray is acting as an evaporative air conditioner. And of course, an air conditioner, an evaporative air conditioner, can produce temperatures below ambient. That's how it works. That's how it cools your house if you have an evaporative air conditioner. Can you cool it below ambient at full load? Not in any intercooler I've ever worked with. But what you can do is reduce those peak temperatures quite substantially. It really is extraordinarily effective. One thing I didn't mention that I should perhaps have said is typically you don't aim the nozzle straight at the intercooler. You aim the nozzle so it's facing forwards. So it disperses its tiny droplets into a cloud ahead of the car, and that air is drawn straight through. If you aim the nozzle at a surface which is too close, then those drops will coalesce on the intercooler surface, and then they'll become big drops, and again you're back to not being able to evaporate them anywhere nearly as readily. So using an ultra high pressure pump, using a little mains inverter, using a good quality nozzle and good quality hoses, and you can have an absolutely outstanding intercooler water spray. It doesn't use a lot of water, and its cooling performance is quite extraordinary. The book's called Modifying the Electronics of Modern Classic Cars, cars for the 1990s and 2000s. I cover that intercooler water spray in that book. I have fitted them to multiple of my own cars over the years, and I can demonstrate their effectiveness. They do work very, very well. It's a great approach to take, and of course it saves you having to spend a lot of money on a very large new air-to-air intercooler. I recommend the book to you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.